Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and through you to the members. I filed this particular amendment for several different reasons, but let me preface my comments to begin with the following statements. One, there won't be anybody in this chamber that would ever accuse me of not loving animals. Animals have always been an integral part of my life and my family's life. I not only grew up on a farm in a rural part of Massachusetts, but I also learned and understood the value of and the responsibility and care to animals, both domesticated and those that are wild. And even prior to becoming a legislator, I've had both a long and personally participative life in caring and rehabbing animals that have been neglected, abused, abandoned, and maltreated. My home has served as a foster home and haven for animals that have been seriously maltreated and/or required rehabilitation and even daily clinical care to be put on a road to full recovery. As a legislator, I've always made the care, protection, and the enforcement of animal welfare policy a major priority for me. And I have filed numerous bills, and many of them with my colleagues, to try to further that. And that has been something that's been extremely important to me in my life. And in fact, I was the legislator in this building who actually made Responsible Dog Ownership Day something that was a reality on the Hill, even with the then Governor, Republican Romney, where we actually had dogs at the State House outside because we wanted to highlight how important animals, their care, their protection, and the responsibilities of owners are. And it went a long way. All of this goes a long way to underscore why I filed this amendment. First of all, I want to preface that this argument is going to be made on three fronts: fiscally, about equity, and about institution. Fiscally, it's very hard for any of us not to have commended the chairman for putting together a very fiscally austere budget. We all took a very hard line on that, and we sent that budget to the governor. And we expected that governor to look over the decisions we made, and some were much stronger than the Senate's and others were a little bit less. But we came to, I think, a very strong understanding that these are difficult fiscal times. And for those of us who stood the line for our police, for our fire, for our health care, for all of those things, we felt it was important to send a message to the Commonwealth. And that message was that we were going to continue to monitor the fiscal situation of the Commonwealth. We were going to watch those revenues continue to come in, and we would come back to the table when we felt it was really prudent and we saw sure signs of recovery. And if we looked at what came in June, minus $180 million, if we look forward to what has already started to come in July, I'm not convinced, despite the Globe's article today, that we are immersed in a full recovery. And I think we all understand that full recoveries often take time to actually come to fruition to the bottom line of state budgets. So fiscally, I have a hard time having sent a budget along that actually showed some very severe concessions on all agency parts. And so oftentimes when we have individual items that also go to the private sector and the private not-for-profit sector, we have to likewise make very difficult decisions. And so for me, on a fiscal premise, it's very difficult to justify taking away $1 million, $2 million, or even $500,000 from areas that we call our social safety net. And don't kid yourselves if you don't think we're going to continue to hear from those areas. Now, I give the Speaker an awful lot of credit for trying to put some wholeness for those people who've been depleted on the fronts of the social safety net. I think those are very good and admirable things to do. But I also think it's incumbent upon legislators to weigh in to what we think is absolutely critical to that social safety net. Or our promise to the voters and the taxpayers of this state really don't mean a heck of a lot. When I think of fiscal responsibility, I think of it very seriously. And I think of how it all impacts that core social safety net. And I also look back on history. And I look back on history during other difficult fiscal times, even coming in 2003. where I saw likewise severe cuts made, including those made to this particular item, which has to do with Zoo New England. I love zoos. I have one in my district. And when we start talking about equity, if we were talking about zoos on the front, that we have only one zoo in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. And if we want to talk about equating apples to apples, and we think about nonprofits, and we think about the cultural value, we think about the social value, we think about the economic value that those nonprofits contribute, then yes, I would say in equity, we would all weigh those things and say we need to preserve something that is valued and treasured and is the only resource that perhaps does that with wildlife and education of that wildlife. But that is not the case here, folks. And in terms of equity, we do have a valuable treasured resource that operates 2 zoos. But we also have a number of other zoos in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. And in terms of equity, I can't say that those private zoos are receiving the same kind of treatment. Matter of fact, the zoo in my district, and one I share with my colleague, that spans over 300 acres, and the acreage here at Franklin Park pales in comparison to that, with 200 acres devoted to the actual zoo. They have all of the things that even a Franklin Park Zoo has, and maybe perhaps even the Stone Zoo has. They have lions, they have African leopards, they have a rhinoceros, they have elephants. My God, they even have a baby giraffe, and Tansy was just born not that long ago, and he's a baby chimp. They have been in existence for over 60 years, and in the 1970s, the Southwick Zoo fell to its knees with financial hardship because of an economy gone bad and also because of 2 family deaths. They reorganized, they reprioritized, and they brought themselves back from really despondency as a zoo and catapulted themselves up into a realm in which they are heralded around the state for being an excellent zoo. They have an operating budget of $3 million, and their proceeds come from their entrance and fees, their concessions, and their gift shop. That's it. My concern with this amendment, this particular budget item that's now folded into a sub-budget, is this. We know we have a responsibility to the taxpayers to try to wreak out every nickel and dime that we can. We're supposed to do it with real accountability, and we're also supposed to reevaluate the worthiness of those programs and figure out what can we do better, where can we rein in inefficiencies, perhaps where can we borrow, even from the private sector, those ideas that would make something not only more profitable, but more self-sufficient. And when you start to do zoo comparisons, the Southwick Zoo does not have a PR firm that operates on its behalf, aside from not receiving taxpayer funds. It does not have a lobbying firm on its behalf, and it doesn't have a director that makes over 6 figures a year. It's a family-run business that puts the majority of all of its resources into the care, the protection, and the responsibility of these animals. Now I, with my good friend from Westfield, and the gentle lady that I know thinks very passionately about Franklin Park Zoo, and those who may have Stone Zoo, know that even when they opened the gorilla exhibit, I was one of a handful of people that made my way to that zoo. I'm not about, at this point in time, talking about closing a zoo or wanting to prevent that zoo from existence. What I want is accountability and transparency of how taxpayer dollars are spent and how, in comparison to other zoos across the state, we might not be doing the best service, not only to those people who want to visit that zoo in the long term for its viability, but also in terms of those people who are funding that zoo, or zoos in this case.